So I'll move on to diabetic retinopathy. I'll just be giving you simple tips and certain pointers to manage, because diabetic retinopathy is a very vast topic. There's so many aspects to be covered. I hope I can do it in good time. So as you know, diabetes is, it's an epidemic. It's reached epidemic proportions in the world, more so in India. And if diabetes was a country, it would be the third highest populated in the world. So we all see diabetic patients day in and day out. And it's important to know how to deal with this condition. Now, if you go by statistics in India, the prevalence would be around 20% of the patients would have diabetics would have diabetic retinopathy. And after a patient has diabetes for 20 years, a type 1 diabetic would have almost 99 or 200% of the patients would have some amount of diabetic retinopathy, and in type 2 it would be 60%, so 20 years down the line. And the more the number of years the patient is diabetic for, the chances of having retinopathy goes up. So this is how important it is for us and for the patients. Now, a diabetic has a 20 times more chance of becoming blind as compared to his non-diabetic counterpart. And this blindness is largely preventable. And the onus is on us to recognize the diabetic retinopathy and to treat it or to refer the patient. So the first thing that when you see a diabetic retinopathy is to advise the patient. So now here we are not seeing just the eye of the patient. This is one condition where we have to see the patient in totality. We have to see what is the sugar control, what is the hypertensive status, the lipid profile, the HbA1c should be less than 7, the BP should be well controlled. So you have to advise the patient, see if the patient is anemic or not, because anemia again contributes to increase in the retinopathy. Does the patient have any nephropathy coexisting? So you have to see the patient as a complete whole. And it's just when you advise these patients control of their metabolic condition that the diabetic retinopathy also gets controlled. So this is a patient who had retinopathy, and just with systemic control, you see his retina looks so much more cleaner and neater. So when you see a patient, please do emphasize this. Don't just keep seeing the retina. Advise him the other investigations as well. Now, the follow-up schedule is that when a patient has normal-looking retina, you can follow this patient annually. Mild retinopathy is every 9 months. Moderate retinopathy is 6 months. Severe NPDR has to be very closely monitored, 2 to 4 months. If a patient has macular edema, then again every 2 months. PDR, again every 2 to 3 months. And in case you've treated the diabetic retinopathy, then you can monitor 6 monthly or even yearly if you feel the patient is stable. So very mild NPDR, at least 5 to 10% of the patients will develop diabetic retinopathy, so an annual examination is fine. Mild to moderate, I've already told you. Now, this is the time when the patient has moderate retinopathy that you can ask the patient do a color fundus photograph so that you can compare the different visits. You can ask the patient to get an OCT done. So the OCT is going to give you a lot of information. You can identify vitreoretinal interface abnormalities, whether they are present or not, apart from the configuration of the edema present. Now, an angiography is always desirable in these cases. First is to identify any treatable lesions. That is, you may be thinking the patient has NPDR, but the patient would have some new vessels which are picked up by the angiography. To detect any ischemic areas, that is capillary dropout, and to detect enlargement or distortion of the foveal avascular zone. So this is a patient, this is only picked up on angiography. Even clinically, when you see at the macula, you'll see these white vessels. So this gives you an idea that the patient has ischemia at the macula. This patient will not have very good vision, and you can tell the patient that your macula is so ischemic. And when you do the angiography, you can actually see how ischemic the macula is. So in this, the patient may not have any edema on the OCT, but the patient will have very poor vision because of the ischemia. Now, OCT, again, you can see, like I showed you in the previous, you can see a disruption of the ellipsoid zone. So these patients, again, you can prognosticate and say they will not have a very good outcome. Now, DRIL is another condition that nowadays we are talking about, where you're not able to distinguish any of the retinal layers. There's a disruption in the inner retinal layers as well. And again, these patients may not have very good vision in spite of all your treatment. Now for macular edema, the term that we now use is center involving DME, as opposed to CSME that was used in previous years. Now the definition of diabetic macular edema has evolved because we moved from lasers to injection. And foveal center involving or center not involving diabetic macular edema is what we talk about. So if you see, CSME was these three conditions, but center involving would only consist of macular edema in the within 500 microns of the fovea. And this would all come into non-central diabetic macular edema. So for non-center involving diabetic macular edema, we can still do laser photocoagulation. So we can do a focal laser to the microaneurysms if they are present beyond 500 microns, or you can do a grid laser to areas of the thickened laser. So a laser is done in a grid form here. So this is extra non-center involving DME. But for center involving DME, the treatment of choice is anti-VEGF injections. So how to give these anti-VEGF? You can start with 3 injections which are given monthly. Now different people have different protocols. Again, in a diabetic, it's very difficult to give you a protocol which will apply to every patient, because every diabetic patient is different, his systemic status is different, so you have to tailor your treatment to the patient. But you can give 3 injections and then give these injections as and when needed. They make the macular edema go away. But again, you have to tell the patient right in the beginning. What I tell the patient is that your vessels are like a leaky pipe and the water is flowing out of those pipes. The injections will only absorb the water, but the pipe is not going to be repaired and the water will come back. So you will need multiple injections. The pipe will be get okay only if you control your blood sugar and blood pressure. So that is the analogy that I give to the patients, and they do understand this, and that is how you tell them that these injections will be needed again and again. Many patients assume a 1 injection is a panacea cure for everything, but you have to tell them right in the beginning itself. You can also do a combined approach where you give an injection and you supplement it with laser. And you see these hard exudates and hemorrhages have disappeared. If there is no response to the anti-VEGF, you can either switch to a second anti-VEGF, or what I prefer is to switch to steroids, that is the dexamethasone implant. Especially if the edema is chronic, where there are large cystoid spaces, sometimes I also start with the dex implant in the first go itself. So there's so many injections now, so seeing the patient and the patient's profile, you can decide which injection and when you want to give it. When to stop the injections? When the patient's vision has improved, the foveal contour is normal, and their cystic spaces have disappeared. And when do you say there's no further improvement? When there is less than a 10% decrease in the central subfield thickness or a less than 5-letter increase in the visual acuity since the last injection. Now, when you see a patient with a severe NPDR, you should examine him very, very carefully, because these patients will have a very high risk of developing PDR. Very careful follow-up of these patients every 3 to 4 months. You can also do a pan-retinal photocoagulation for these patients, especially if you feel they are not going to follow up. And when you do a pan-retinal photocoagulation, it has to be a full PRP. I've seen people do a segmental PRP. It has no value in diabetics. The entire retina has to be lasered. Now, when you have a patient who you label as severe NPDR, look for venous beading and irmas. Now, irmas are these intraretinal microvascular abnormalities. When you see it with a 90D or even with your direct, you can see that they are present inside the retina. And whenever you see venous beading, like you see here in this picture, the venous beading, this shows you that this patient has a very high chance of moving on to proliferative diseases. So these subtle signs you should watch out for, so that you can follow up these patients very, very carefully, or even do a PRP if you feel the patient is not going to come back. Now, do not see with the direct ophthalmoscope, and indirect ophthalmoscopy is extremely important. Like you see in this case, if you just see the center of the retina, it all looks good. It looks like a mild NPDR. You just see a few microaneurysms here and there. But here in the periphery, here on the nasal side, you see this fibrovascular proliferation lurking here. This patient has a PDR. So a dilated examination, and you see it with the indirect or your 90D also, but not with the direct ophthalmoscope. Now, a patient may sometimes come with symptoms of, he may say, I just have blurring of vision, and you may not see any blood on the first inspection. But put this patient on the slit lamp, and you may see some, like you see for cells in the vitreous, so similarly, you may see blood cells on the slit lamp. And always examine the inferior part. Ask the patient to look down and see the inferior part of the retina. You may see a streak of hemorrhage over there. And these are patients who you will miss. They have PDR, but you will not be able to see it so well. So these are some pictures of a proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Now for a proliferative, PRP is still the treatment of choice. This laser is done in 3 sittings generally, and the entire retina is covered. So this is, you see here, before laser, this new vessels here. This is after laser, they have regressed. But laser you cannot do if the patient has pre-existing macular edema. If you do a PRP in a patient who has macular edema, the macular edema is going to increase. So if a patient has a proliferative disease along with macular edema, you have to give anti-VEGF injections to the patient. Now, anti-VEGF injections work 2 ways. They also help in regressing the new vessels. They also help in keeping the edema away. So in patients with both the conditions, it's best to go with injections and not do the laser till you're absolutely sure that the macular edema has gone away. Now in cases like this is an involuted, many times you'll see patients in the clinic like this. So their macula seems okay, they have reasonably good vision, but they have this kind of a fibrosed kind of a membrane here. So this is a self-involuted PDR. Now these cases also, it's worthwhile to do a laser, because these patients have ischemia in the periphery, and down the line they may again get new vessels. So it's worthwhile to do, but the laser in these cases has to be very gentle laser. You don't have to go anywhere near these fibrovascular proliferation. Otherwise, they can pull up, and then they can cause the retina to detach. So the laser has to be very gentle. It has to be in divided sessions, and it has to be away from these areas, these fibrous areas. Now, again, like I said, you can also use anti-VEGF injections just to treat PDR. But in the Indian context, sometimes it may be a little, the patient may not be following up very well if you're just treating the patient with anti-VEGF injections for PDR. The patient may not follow up, and then down the years may come. So generally, we do try to do a laser also in proliferative disease. Now, what about anti-VEGFs and vitreous hemorrhage? So you have a patient with vitreous hemorrhage. Should you advise anti-VEGF injection to this patient or not? So before you advise injection, it's very important to do a good ultrasound. So the ultrasound is going to tell you if there is any traction on the retina or not. Patients who have traction, large areas of traction on the ultrasound, those patients should not be given an anti-VEGF, because an anti-VEGF, when you give, it causes again a contraction. It causes fibrosis of that fibrovascular tissue, and it can cause the macular area to detach. If it is not already detached, it can pull the retina up. If you feel that there is no traction on the ultrasound, or if you can see the retina through that hemorrhage and you feel the macula is fine, there's no traction, then you can give an anti-VEGF. Now, what is the rationale for giving anti-VEGF? The anti-VEGF in a vitreous hemorrhage is not going to help in clearing the hemorrhage, but it's going to prevent further hemorrhage from happening. It's going to seal those vessels, the new vessels that are bleeding. And in the meantime, the body will clear the hemorrhage that has already come. So you have to tell the patient that I'm giving you the injection. It's not going to make your blood go away, but it will prevent further blood from coming, and this hemorrhage will gradually clear up on its own. Again, like I mentioned, always treat macular edema before you do any PRP, and anti-VEGFs should be used with caution in cases of fibrovascular traction that threaten the macula. So this is something that you should be very careful about. If there's any fibrovascular traction near the macula, do not give anti-VEGFs. Now, after you've lasered a patient, the patient may still develop vitreous hemorrhage. So why does this happen? So this happens because of a PVD. So many of these well-lasered patients may down the line develop a hemorrhage, but this hemorrhage is PVD induced. So the vitreous which was attached here has separated, and this is how you get the hemorrhage. But these patients, once the PVD occurs, they will do very well. You've lasered them, there'll be an episode of hemorrhage. After that, once this hemorrhage hemorrhage resolves, these patients will have regressed new vessels and they'll do very well. So these patients now, if you've had a PVD-induced hemorrhage, these patients do not require more laser or more injections. This hemorrhage will settle on its own. So now there are certain conditions where lasers, injections don't work, and we have to take the patient up for surgery. That is if the patient has a non-resolving hemorrhage. Now, how do you say it's a non-resolving hemorrhage? Earlier, we would wait for 6 months also, but now with advances in our instrumentation, and if the patient wants, we can operate right away. Generally, we wait a month or 2 months, and then we like to clear up the hemorrhage. Then any PDR, despite your laser, if the patient still has progressive PDR, any macula involving or macula threatening tractional detachment, combined detachments, and vitreous hemorrhage with rubeosis iridis, these are the cases where you take the patient up for a vitrectomy, and that is, so you have to refer the patient to your retinal colleague. So the final points are that metabolic control is very important. For macular edema, which is central, anti-VEGF is the treatment of choice. For non-center, you can do laser. For severe NPDR, you can laser in certain conditions. Like I said, if you feel the patient will not follow up, if the other eyes had a bad outcome, if the patient has very rapidly progressing diabetic retinopathy, then you can even laser severe NPDR. For PDR, a pan-retinal photocoagulation or anti-VEGF, and vitrectomy for TRD or a non-resolving vitreous hemorrhage. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Tinku, for a very exhaustive, this is a huge topic to cover it in this way is very difficult, but you did a good job. You mentioned that if there is a coexisting DME and PDR, you would probably give an injection and not start laser. How long would you wait to start laser?
See, if maybe on the nasal side, if I feel that patient has both, till the edema has gone down appreciably, that is the time I would start laser. Not 1 month.
2 weeks.
Even maybe I'll give the second injection and I see that the edema has gone down. It's only then that I would like to start the laser. And laser very gradually on the nasal side, nowhere near the macula, till the edema has resolved to quite an extent.
So I would say, Dr. Tinku, that of the two conditions, PDR is much more severe. And the ETDRS and all studies have suggested that in the presence of both, give preference to PDR. So when you're giving an injection, you can start your PRP in a regular manner. Your injection will anyway prevent the exacerbation of the DME. And with these newer strong anti-VEGFs, the last three at least, faricimab, aflibercept, and brolucizumab, I think they're so strong that you can start your laser instead of
it depends if the patient has large cystoid spaces. So once I've given the injection, I know the injection is going to take care of the new vessels as well. So I'm not that worried about it. If I feel the patient is going to come for follow-up, then I would just keep the patient under observation.
See, for these,
when it has come down a little
correct.
bit.
But for comprehensive ophthalmologists, the message is that PDR is very important. If you give an injection, of course, they'll be all right for 2 months. But after that, what will happen to them? They will be left in the wilderness. So that's
don't, that point should be, because there are a lot of patients, they're just injected and they're lost to follow-up. They come back after 1 or 2 years with a vitreous hemorrhage.
With a TRD or a combined other thing is, just like injections, we cannot tell a patient that we will be giving you 3 injections for DME or 5. It depends on how the patient requires. Similarly, for laser also, we cannot say 3 sittings or 4 sittings. It really depends till your new vessels on the disc or elsewhere have resolved. And we've had to have 10 to 12 sessions in some cases. So we can say, okay, roughly 3 to 4 laser sessions. But if your new vessels are still there, we'll keep on adding. We'll keep on adding. Because otherwise they'll say, you said 3 and now 3 are over and now you still want to do more. So I never tell them. I say, I don't know. I will decide next time when I see you whether I will need or not. Every time they will ask how many more. I said, I don't know. I have to say that. I have to see you and then only I can tell you next time. Also, do you use Octa, or would you advise the use of Octa if they have for determining whether NVD has regressed or NVE has regressed? Sometimes you have a doubt whether NVD is there or not. Do I have to add more laser or not? Do you use Octa as a non-invasive tool?
No, generally not. I don't use Opta. But I would repeat the angiography. I would do a check angiography 3 months down when I've done the laser. I would do a check angiography to see if there are any new vessels still present or not, and then supplement the
So
laser.
nowadays, instead of angio, you can just take the patient to Opta. That's what
Yeah,
we've started doing. So even our technicians are able to do the Opta disc angiography. So very clearly, you're able to see the new vessels in 2 minutes without doing a fluorescent. And that helps me to decide whether we need to add any more laser or stop the laser. Because sometimes you really can't make out the new vessels, regressed new vessels versus fine new vessels. You cannot make out.
Yeah, but for the anterior segment surgeon, the Opta would be a little bit of a challenge to interpret. So for the message to them would be that an angiography should be done. After the laser has been done, a few months, 3 months down the line, you can do another angiography to check whether new vessels are present or not, and then supplement the laser again.
Yeah, angiography, whichever you can do. And you had also mentioned the point where in vitreous hemorrhage, you give an injection so that the hemorrhage is allowed to clear by the body. But also, too important is that in the meantime, while you are waiting, keep adding laser. Otherwise, the anti-VEGF injection effect would have gone and they will come back with a rebleed. So you gave an injection in vitreous hemorrhage, and as Dr. Tinku said, it is not going to clear the hemorrhage. It's only going to close the new vessel, so you don't have a recurrent hemorrhage. But you have to use those 6 weeks to keep adding laser as the blood resolves. So keep calling them every 2 weeks and keep adding laser as the blood is resolving.
Yes, good point. Any of the audience, any questions?
Is it?
Really? Thank you.
I want to make some points because when following up a diabetic retinopathy patient, please don't rely only on indirect and direct. Please combine all three: slit exam, direct, and indirect. Because individual items have their own importance. And regarding injections, I'm using it for a quite long period. Please don't forget to do ECG before applying the patient. Please don't tell your patient it's a very simple procedure, nothing will happen, I will give you the injection, it's a matter of few minutes and you will be fine. Because there are a lot of deadlier combinations, and if anything happens, though rare, you will be in total shock. Because please don't put them in an unexpected future that no surgery is complication-less, zero complication. So this counseling is also very important, that you may develop retinal detachment, may develop endophthalmitis, may develop vitreous hemorrhage. It is very, very, very rare. But if it happens, and if I have told the patient earlier that it is nothing, and we will be in a shock.
True.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And informed consent is extremely important, and you must always make the patient sign an informed consent. That is utmost very important.
Yeah, very important. Every injection we have to emphasize to the patient that this is a risky procedure. We are taking a risk in this. You may lose your eye. Almost every injection we have to remind the patient.
If you say you
Well,
may
I do
lose
say
your
it,
eye,
you
the
know.
patient, then you will lose the patient. If you say that.
But not your freedom from the, Any other queries? People are... For injection, you mean? Dr. Tinku?
No, it's done as a daycare procedure. The patient comes, we give the injection, we put a patch on the patient's eye for 2 hours. So that just because it's more comfortable, we put ointment and we put a patch. It's more comfortable for the patient that way. Ask the patient to remove the patch at home itself. And then we can call the patient the next day. Different people have different protocols. I like to, if they can come, it's better to call them the next day, otherwise after 2 weeks.
What should be the
And you should always tell them the symptoms of anything that has gone wrong. The patient should not have any deterioration in vision, any pain or redness. So you must always tell them of these warning signs before you send them. A lot of our patients are from outstation and they go away right after taking the injections. But then they are told about these warning signs to call immediately if something happens. Yeah. Yes, please.
What should be the direction of the bevel for intravitreal?
Bevel up.
Towards lens or bevel direction?
You have to go perpendicularly into the vitreous cavity, not towards the lens at all.
Okay.
Perpendicularly down into the vitreous cavity. Bevel up, you can go slightly into the sclera tangentially at around 20 to 30 degrees tangentially. Instead of going straight in, go tangentially a little bit, then turn your needle and go vertically down into the vitreous cavity. So that way you have a more sealed effect of the entry that you've made made, the sealing is going to be better if you have a tangential and then vertically down.
Bevel direction?
Bevel direction is not so important.
No, not.
You go bevel up. The bevel should be facing up. Go like direction. You mean radial or?
No, ideally bevel up so that the drug doesn't
Bevel
directly
up
fall
and
on the
then-
macula. But that's not always possible. So you can just give it anyway, but just see that you're not injecting directly.
So which quadrant is preferable? Temporal?
Inferotemporal is the most accessible. Inferotemporal is usually the most accessible, and because of the patient's reflex movement upwards, that is the best also. If you go superotemporal, sometimes patient moves up also. So
Yeah. Also, if you have a little hemorrhage, it's covered with the lower lid, so the inferotemporal or even inferior is fine. Quadrant is not so important. Whatever is easy for you to access. But generally, we prefer the inferotemporal quadrant.
Thank you.
Sir? 30 gauge needle. 30 gauge.
yes,
So
doctor.
what injection will you give for the macular edema in nephrotic syndrome, I mean renal failure patients, madam? Because a lot of edema will, anemic patients will be there. Glucose is not under control, and a lot of complications are there. And almost the drug is nephrotoxic.
Regarding affordability, we have two options.
Mike is.
Regarding affordability, we have two options. One is use of Avastin, which is a multiple, injection you can give to multiple patients. That is little cheap, but then you have to be very careful about the safety and the,
Medico-legal
infection
aspects.
problems. And because it is not, medico-legally, you can be in a soup in case there is an infection. So I would recommend that giving biosimilars, Indian biosimilars like Razumab, which cost around 8,000, 9,000 rupees the injection. So you can charge whatever your surgeon fees over it. That will give you more peace of mind.
What was your question actually? One is affordability.
No, madam, not affordable. The drug is nephrotoxic and patient is in the renal failure and dyslipidemia will be there in the renal failure.
Nephropathy
Anemia-
is there, significant nephropathy. And what is the injection to give?
No, ma'am, because a lot of macular edema will be there secondary to diabetes. All
Okay,
these
so
complications
if there
will
is
see.
significant nephropathy, first you need a clearance from your nephrologist that and they don't know that anti-VEGF can damage. So you have to let them know that anti-VEGF may cause some damage to the renal functions. Can the patient take it? Can the patient take that decline? And can you manage if there is a decline? So if the nephrologist feels that the patient cannot take any further deterioration of the renal function, then you can switch to steroid if it's just a DME or a RVO. In AMD, you cannot switch to steroid, but in vascular conditions, you can use steroid then in that case. Yeah? Is that, have you, is that,
ask the
is that answering your
nephrologist.
question?
Most of the times, nephrologists, they won't give any opinion on the intravitreal injections. Madam. That's the
That's
problem.
because they don't know. So you have to tell them that this injection can cause a problem. Are you okay with that? Will you be able to handle that? Can the patient handle that? So they will generally tell that no, this patient cannot. He's already very severely compromised. Or they will say you can go ahead. He is reasonably good.
And how far it is, feasible and safe to start with the steroid, madam, because we know that the drug is nephrotoxic and patient is already under a compromised situation.
You can give a steroid with the idea that IOP can rise, cataract will form. So those issues are then there are local ocular issues with the steroid. But those are safer than having kidney problems.
Yeah, generally steroids are safe.
Yeah.
It's very rarely that they will cause such a high, rise in IOP. Or even cataract formation with one injection, generally there's no cataract. It's with repeated injections that you get cataract. So I think steroids is a very good option in such patients where
Steroid
patient
means
is-
Dex implant.
Yeah. Patient is almost, usually they will be on the dialysis, madam. Can we be keeping in that point in view? Can we go for ranibizumab?
Yeah, now this is a very good point. If the patient is already on 3 times a week dialysis, that means there is no renal tissue left. So our nephrologists say that there is nothing left to preserve. Please go ahead and give whatever you want because already the patient is on external, renal management. So if it's very bad, then again there is nothing left to preserve and you can give. But if it is a once a week dialysis, twice a week dialysis, there they may not be able to tolerate. So there you may hold the anti-VEGF or you may give a steroid.
Thank you.
Madam, one point I'd like to add, because in our hospital, both dialysis and ophthalmology units are there. At the time of dialysis, anticoagulants are used with the
Yeah.
implant. So if a patient is having scheduled dialysis on, suppose on Monday, please avoid giving on Tuesday. You would give on Monday and under maximum possible gap with the dialysis. First day Monday, next day Thursday. Anticoagulant if it gradually go off. Don't give on Friday. give it on the Thursday itself, and if possible, defer the dialysis by 1 day or 1 session, so
See,
the injection comes first.
Yeah, your point
Otherwise-
is good, but usually I think you're talking about heparin, right? So heparin, the duration in the eye body is only 12 hours. So generally, if it's a post-dialysis, next day we do surgeries also. In fact, we ask for dialysis 1 day before surgery so that the patient is comfortable on the table. So that's usually heparin will clear out next
I
day.
totally agree. Actually, you don't have to do a heparin-free dialysis. We've had now so many patients, since I'm in a multi-specialty hospital, which has a very big nephro department. So we don't stop the heparin, and we ask the patient to get a dialysis 1 day prior.
Before surgery.
So that the patient is more comfortable, patient doesn't become breathless on table, systemically better
Unlike
controlled.
antiplatelet agents, where you 3 to 5 days we stop.
We don't even, for cataract surgery, we don't stop anticoagulants also. Aspirin, warfarin also we don't. Yeah. So heparin-free dialysis is not actually needed now. We have a lot of consensus on that.
Ma'am, you advise for hand movement after the intravitreal injection. In addition to that, I want to tell that I'll do NCT, non-contact tonometry, after 1 hour or 2 hours after that. And in follow-up 1 or 2 days, again
No,
check the
no.
way.
See, the
Can we do
pressure
that?
rise will be maximum in the first 1 to 2 hours only. So calling them next morning or even after the 48 hours for IOP check is meaningless.
No, after 2
No, he
hours.
said 2 hours.
Hours.
Yeah.
2 hours.
That can be done. A lot of people do that. A lot of surgeons,
Yeah.
but then you have to make the patient wait. So generally, if the patient, you don't want to make him wait, you can give him a... Yeah.
See, the IOP will be highest at the time of injection. It's not going to be higher after 2 hours because right now you have injected. So if there is hand movements immediately post injection, very unlikely that it will disappear 2 hours later. Am I wrong?
But I noticed that it will be okay after 2 hours. Not a single patient, they have a rise of intraocular pressure after 2 hours.
But you have not checked at the time. So
Yeah, vision also checked.
yeah, we can do whatever we are comfortable with. See, the more the safety we take, it's better for the patient. There's no need to cut corners.
Madam, your expert opinion on the cost of the molecule, madam. One, as we know, Avastin around 10,000, ranibizumab around 20,000. Now some companies come with 9,000, and latestly another company has come with 4,000. So your take on message on that about the efficacy of these injections.
The cost of these injections.
One is 4,500 and another is 21,000.
What can we say about that? The company knows what is their manufacturing
Can we
cost.
use these 4,500 rupees injections also? And
They
can we
work.
expect-
Biosimilars do work. They do. They are efficacious. It's not. But then you have to be sure which company you're using. There's so many companies which have a good track record, who we have experience with. So those are the biosimilars which work.
Cost should not be the only criteria why you choose it because the efficacy may not be that good if it is very cheap. And as Dr. Tinku said, you should have 1 or 2 to which you are sticking, which have very good track record. Every day there is a new company now coming up. Ultimately, you have to face the music if something goes wrong, not that company.
Yeah, something you have experience with.
With a recent history of MI or stroke, what would be the preferred anti-VEGF of choice?
Steroid.
None in anti-VEGF we can inject?
Yeah, then if you have to give, you have to use the one which has the shortest half-life in the body, serum, which could be ranibizumab. Compared to aflibercept,
But how much time can we inject with a recent history of MI or stroke?
ideally 3 months, minimum.
But is ranibizumab safe enough?
Yes, the safest one might be ranibizumab because it has the shortest serum half-life. But even that, if it is not, DME is not an urgent disease, RVO is not urgent, so these can wait for 3 months. If it's AMD, yes, that probably will cause macular scarring in 3 months, so there you may give it a lower dose if you can.
What about aflibercept?
That is a longer half-life in the body also, and much stronger also, the suppression, VEGF suppression. So possibly that would be
But are we medico-legally safe to inject ranibizumab?
ranibizumab, yeah.
Yes, legally safe.
Yes.
With a history of MI or stroke.
3 months down the
3
line.
months down.
3 months.
Medical
down.
legally, yeah, 3 months probably.
3 months. Mike.
drugs, so they are already on preventable things.
Though we don't really keep that hard and fast. I mean, you have to see the risk-benefit ratio to the patient. You can't have a blanket that 3 months I'm not going to inject because you've had a recent MI. It's not a
3 months or 1 year,
blanket
madam,
thing.
Which is the safest? Because especially for the
Ranibizumab you can give.
after 3 months.
Yes.
1 year.
Even during the
before
3
you
months,
can
if you
give.
have to give something, that would be the safest. After 3 to 6 months, anyway, you can choose anything you want. But within the period of risk, ranibizumab might be the least dangerous.
And moreover, anybody who's had stroke or stenting, these patients are on anticoagulants, so they are less risky. Once they are on the drugs and they are compliant with their treatment for stroke and all, then they are little less risky.
Thank you.
Ma'am, in cases of non-center DME and OCT, we have parafoveal DAP. So it is advised, like, what should be the recommendation, like anti-VEGF or strict metabolic control, or the vision
I
is
think
6
this
by
is
6. In cases of
Paracentral DME, how to
non-center
manage?
involving DME, on OCT, if we have parafoveal DME, if the vision is good, 6 by 6, so should we advise anti-VEGF or strict metabolic control is?
Just metabolic. If the vision is good and there's paracentral, then there's no need for injection.
And on FFA, there's like a succinate parafoveally and leaking microaneurysm.
Then you can do a laser
focal
onto
laser.
that. You can do a focal laser so that it doesn't move on to the macula.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
that's a
vision
very good case for a laser treatment, a focal laser treatment.
Even if the vision is 6 by 6 good.
Yes, you can do that. You can do that if you see a large succinate ring, because ultimately it's going to move on to the fovea. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think
Are anti-VEGF really dangerous or contraindicated in case of the recent history of MI or stroke? Because, the quantity is very less. Is it?
See, yeah, that's a very
medical
good...
legally it's okay that if the patient doesn't give history, in that case, if we, by mistake, we have injected or, is
See,
it-
that's a very good question. Actually, there has been no clear evidence that these cause any of these events. It's just a very safer side precaution. None of the randomized trials have conclusively shown any relation. But it's just something theoretically we know that when intravenous anti-VEGFs were being given for oncology, they were causing thromboembolism. So we are just taking that data into our intravitreal. And as you said, the dose is so less. So really speaking, there is no evidence actually. So if you have a significant retinal disease that demands the injection, you should give it.
yeah.
What is the standard protocol post-operative medicines for the side for any intravitreal injection?
Antibiotic, moxifloxacin eye drops. Yeah, that's it.
But I don't
For 3
prescribe
days.
even that. Because
Yeah, there are so many people who don't. You may not even prescribe an anti. There's a lot of controversy. What I personally give for 3 days, a lot of people give topical. No anti-glaucoma. No, just antibiotic.
Antibiotics also, if you're giving repeated injections, you are going to just create a surface resistance.
Yeah, true. So a lot of people would feel more comfortable in
medical
giving.
legally again.
Again, medical legally. And patients would also feel more comfortable if they're putting something. Also a lubricant.
Yes.
A lubricant.
Good evening,
And
ma'am.
you can give the patient a Dimox right after if you feel that there might be a rise in IOP. If the patient's nephropathic status is okay, then you can give a Dimox.
Is there any contraindication of the anti-VEGF in pregnancy, or if there is not any contraindication, which anti-VEGF?
That's a single absolute contraindication is pregnancy. That's an absolute contraindication.
Okay.
And no anti-VEGF in pregnancy.
Okay.
That's the only absolute contraindication.
Absolute contraindication. Or is there any, in pregnancy, should we laser the very severe or severe NPDR patient, or
Laser you can always do, yeah. Even very severe
yeah.
NPDR, if you feel the patient will go into proliferative disease, you can do laser. You can give intravitreal steroids if there's edema, but anti-VEGF no.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you so much for this very interactive session. You've been a lovely audience. We've enjoyed interacting with you, and hope it has been a fruitful session for you. I thank all my the speakers, the moderators of this session for being here and answering all the questions, and look forward to seeing you again next year. Thank you so much. And you can always come with your queries later on also. You can always write to us.
Thanks, Tinku, for
Thank
a very
you.
good session, and congratulations on this participation.
Thank you. Thank you.